And before you watch, write any comment and you will move on to the next video. Also don't forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. Enjoy watching. During the World Champion Sweet Making competition, a famous sweet maker is accidentally crushed by his own candy statue. Full of regret he never became the world's greatest sweet maker, he is given a second chance by a goddess who reincarnates him into an alternate world as Pastry Mille Morteln, son of minor Lord Casserole and his wife Agnes. Pastry retains his passion for sweets, but their farmlands can only produce wheat and barley, and sugar is an expensive luxury. By improving farming techniques, Pastry hopes he can bring about a dessert renaissance in his new world. Bandits threaten their farms, so Casserole decides Pastry will undergo Sanctification, a religious ceremony to unlock his magical powers. Traveling to the capital, Pastry sees for the first time this world's fruits and exotic foods and is determined to achieve his dream. During Sanctification, Pastry is denied all sensory stimulation for 48 hours, which he endures by imagining all the desserts he will create, and unlocks a powerful magic ability called replication. Casserole makes a donation to the church, but the greedy priest, who secretly despises Casserole for earning his lordship through military victories instead of noble birth, is unsatisfied with the amount and decides to sell information about Pastry's abilities to whoever can afford it. With the bandits only days away, Casserole orders all crops harvested, all water sources blocked up, and all his people to gather in his village with the crops to draw the bandits directly to them, reducing collateral damage from the expected battle. The bandits arrive, hungry and eager to plunder the crops. Fearing he will never realize his dream of creating desserts, Pastry begins planning a defensive strategy. Casserole discovers the bandits are all ex-cavalry who deserted from the army, leading a group of prisoners as human shields. They lure the cavalry in close, where Pastry and the village children cause chaos with slingshots and flaming arrows. As the bandits make their way inside, they kill several villagers and Pastry is taken hostage by the bandits' leader. Having fallen into his trap, Pastry reveals his replication ability can copy absolutely anything he sees, so he copies one bandit's fire-burned face onto all the bandits, crippling them with the pain and ending the battle in an instant. The bandits are restrained in the barn. For political reasons, they are to be handed over to Countess Brioche of Reedy's territory, where the bandits came from, so the Countess can retain her reputation by claiming she captured the bandits, since it was her responsibility in the first place. Pastry's friends Mark and Lumi are awarded swords taken from the bandits and assigned as Pastry's future lieutenants. Curious about the bandits, Mark and Lumi sneak into the barn, where the bandit leader tricks Mark into coming too close, steals back his sword, stabs Lumi, and escapes with Mark as a hostage. Pastry follows after them and manages to rescue Mark while the bandit escapes. Pastry is forced to admit to Casserole they only survive thanks to having secretly replicated Casserole's teleportation magic onto himself. Casserole swears Pastry to secrecy. If it was revealed Pastry can replicate every magic spell in existence, powerful people would try turning him into a living weapon. Mark apologizes to Lumi for getting her hurt and Pastry bakes a banka apple pie to celebrate. Lumi's father Glassage suggests that Mark should properly atone his mistake by marrying Lumi, and Lumi nonchalantly agrees, leaving Mark embarrassed about being engaged to be married to Lumi. Casserole is short of money for repairs to his lands following the bandit invasion. As his sister Josephine is almost old enough to marry, Pastry has a brilliant idea. Nobles arranging marriages for their children travel extensively so their children can meet potential spouses. As travel is expensive, Pastry suggests replicating images of their children's faces. These matchmaking pictures can be sent back and forth by messenger cheaper than people traveling for weeks and are a guaranteed commercial success. Casserole and Pastry visit Countess Brioche, a shrewd politician. She serves tea and sweet biscuits to impress them with her wealth, yet is confused when Pastry clearly dislikes them and completely thrown off balance when it is Pastry, not Casserole, who mentions her failure to eradicate the bandits. Catching her in several lies, Pastry expertly manipulates Brioche into admitting responsibility and paying compensation for the damage to Casserole's lands. Accepting defeat, Brioche asks what was wrong with her biscuits and is surprised at his answer. The biscuits were actually too sugary and not a good match for the flavor of tea. Brioche decides Pastry might be worth keeping an eye on and is amazed by his gift of a replicated picture of her. At a banquet held by Lord Cattlesec, leader of the kingdom's army, Pastry and Casserole meet his grandson Squale. While demonstrating his picture-making magic, Pastry causes Squale to fall for a picture of Lady Petra Huberek, who is seeking a husband. Cattlesec is furious Pastry manipulated Squale, as the Hubereks are in a constant feud with their neighboring duchy. However, he rethinks his anger when Pastry secretly informs him Margrave Huberek is using Petra's betrothal for illicit means in his ongoing feud. Impressed by his political awareness, Cattlesec publicly visits Margrave Huberek so Squale can meet Petra, cleverly bringing the feud to the king's personal attention, as Pastry had hoped. Days later, Squale is secretly engaged to Petra. As Huberek's enemies will be angered by this if they find out Cattlesec hires Casserole to safely escort Petra to the capital for her coming-of-age ceremony, where the biggest problem will be stopping the church leaking news of the secret engagement. Pastry has the brilliant idea to hide Petra in the church's sanctification chamber, protected from assassins and preventing the church prying. On the journey, the carriage is attacked by assassins. Pastry defends Petra and her sister Licorice, causing Licorice to develop a crush on him. Casserole teleports them the rest of the way to the cathedral in the city. Elsewhere, Lord Armire, the enemy of Margrave Huberek, hires mercenaries to kidnap Petra. This would disgrace Lord Cattlesec and, by pretending to rescue her, would restore Lord Armire to his former noble status by being allowed to marry Petra himself. Petra begins her sanctification, so Casserole sends Pastry to help Licorice relax before her own ceremony. Now sanctified Petra is taken to attend her and Squale's official engagement announcement party. Licorice cannot relax around her maid, Sarah, chaperoning her against being alone with a man, even one as young as Pastry. The mercenaries attack the cathedral and escape with Pastry and Licorice. Pastry keeps Licorice from panicking and easily manipulates their guard to reveal they are employed by a noble who hates the Cattlesecs and the Hubereks. Lord Armire, a disgraced duke stripped of his nobility. Pastry quickly teleports a message to Casserole, who gathers men to storm the Armire mansion. The mercenary chief realizes they kidnapped the wrong sister and won't be paid, so he decides to kill Licorice. Pastry escapes his ropes and confidently challenges him to fight. Casserole and his men invade the mansion, so the chief escapes. Armire is arrested while Casserole and Pastry pursue the chief, whom Pastry easily defeats, having magically sabotaged his sword back when they were still tied up. 1 month later, Squale and Petra's engagement is made public. Pastry privately confronts Lord Cattlesec on the implausibility of mercenaries kidnapping Licorice so easily, unless they received secret assistance from someone with an interest in seeing Armire dealt with for good. Cadlec, who was that very someone, is surprised by Pastry's figuring out his scheme but admits it was wrong to put Licorice in danger and agrees to finance improvements to Casserole's farmlands in exchange for Pastry's silence. Lord Huberek is able to sneakily outmaneuver a panicking Pastry into agreeing to marry Licorice, leaving Casserole aghast. Cattlesec, thoroughly amused by Pastry's predicament, gets petty revenge by announcing the engagement throughout the kingdom. Licorice is thrilled by the engagement and Pastry decides to make her as happy as he can. Knowing his fondness for sweets, Licorice presents him cookies she made herself, which Pastry forces himself to eat, concealing from her that she must have mistakenly used salt instead of sugar. Casserole risks his life telling Agnes Pastry is suddenly engaged. Brioche is furious at Lord Huberek. By marrying one daughter to Squale and another daughter to Pastry, he is blatantly trying to gain enough political influence to surpass her. Pastry receives black locust saplings from Lord Cattlesec, trees that survive in poor soil and produce nectar, a substitute for honey. Pastry plans to construct reservoirs to store rainwater. Casserole is thrilled thanks to Pastry his farms are in profit for the first time. His joy is short-lived when he learns Pastry is up to something drastic again. Using drill, a tunneling spell copied from the mercenary chief, Pastry digs 3 vast reservoirs. Casserole is furious Pastry flattened one of his mountains to do so and punishes not only Pastry but Mark and Lumi too. Brioche has no daughter to marry Pastry and is too old to marry him herself, so she plots something else instead. Pastry's reservoirs collect so much rain the village constructs permanent canals to irrigate their farms and Pastry's trees. Brioche invites Pastry to a tea party with obvious ulterior motives. Casserole announces Licorice is moving in with them so she can get to know Pastry and her future in-laws. Lord Huberek, certain Brioche has illicit plans for Pastry, hopes Licorice being by Pastry's side at the tea party will deter these plans. Pastry shows Licorice he is making honey-flavored sweets for the party, his excitement making her love him even more. Espying Agnes and Josephine are frustrated Pastry is focusing on sweets instead of Licorice. At the party, which is mostly young nobles seeking marriage partners, Pastry's sweets are a success. Their popularity prompts Pastry to propose regular trade between Casserole and other nobles, but only if their trades are exempted from the extortionate sugar tax. Concerning such trade negotiations, Brioche draws Pastry away for a private conversation, leaving Licorice with Sarah and guard Nico. Pastry plans to produce sugar from Casserole's farms within 3 years, a bold and highly profitable goal, so Brioche grants him use of her coastal ports for shipping his sweets but still cannot guess what his true goal is. In Pastry's absence, Licorice overhears gossiping nobles and fears Pastry might soon abandon her for a nobler bride and tries to leave the party upset. Brioche asks Pastry if he loves Licorice, flustering him enough she easily traps him in a hug just as Licorice enters and sees them. Licorice runs away, which amuses Brioche. Licorice tearfully regrets not being more like Petra, able to stand up to bullies. Pastry assures her it is okay not to be Petra, but to be herself. After giving her a toffee apple, they almost kiss, but are interrupted by a disapproving Sarah. They return home, where as petty revenge for upsetting Licorice, Pastry uses pictures of Brioche grabbing him as wrappers for his sweets, which are then shipped to all his customers. As a result, rumors spread the humiliated Brioche likes younger men and begins receiving marriage proposals from nobles as young as 8 to 10. Huberec's enemy Margrave Luderud is furious at Petra's engagement to Squale and decides to invade Huberec's land with 30,000 men to settle their rivalry before Petra can marry into the Cattlesec family. Pastry plans to purchase goats and chickens for milk and eggs. He also plans to produce sugar from sweet grass. His first attempt to build a sugar extracting machine fails, so Licorice points out he would get the result he wants from a grape press used in winemaking. Pastry rushes to ask Casserole to buy a grape press, but is informed the rivalry between Huberec, Luderud, and their various allies has caused civil war throughout the kingdom. Luderud, assuming the war has strained the alliance between Huberec and Cattlesec, decides to deepen their conflict by targeting Squale, since his death as Petra's fiancé and Cattlesec's heir will be devastating to both families. As there is nothing he can do himself, Pastry focuses on the farms but learns the noble Baron Lunsvage forcibly bought his goats from the trader before they could be delivered. Lunsvage is notorious for bullying less noble families, but due to the war requiring food supplies, it is not practical to lodge a complaint over missold goats. Pastry and Casserole realize they can get the goats back and help the war by volunteering as reinforcements for Huberec, gaining priority access to war supplies, and depart to the front lines. As a noble, Squale does the honorable thing and joins the front line as well, but is sent to a less dangerous area by Huberec to ensure his survival. Luderud, having predicted this, sends a large force to wait for Squale. Casserole and Pastry also figure this out and arrive just in time to save Squale from the ambush. Luderud learns of Squale's survival and, fearing Cattlesec might decide to get involved even though Petra hasn't married Squale yet, is forced to retreat. Squale is deeply affected by his first experience of death and isolates himself in depression. Recalling Pastry helped Mark with his depression, Casserole asks Pastry to help. Squale is plagued by guilt over his men who died. At the victory ball, Pastry presents tart tatin, a dessert made with baked bonkas. Pastry explains the dessert was originally created by mistake and yet was a success anyway. Squale realizes just because he made mistakes doesn't mean he failed. The battle was won and he returned to Petra safely. Huberec offers Pastry a reward, leading to Pastry receiving his goats, along with horses and supplies that should have been sent to Lunsvage, and even the wine press Pastry wanted. Licorice is invited to the royal capital with Petra, so Pastry is immediately dispatched to the city to order a dress for Licorice suitable for the occasion. With access to goat milk and sugar, Pastry makes Licorice a cheesecake, and with the extra supplies from Huberec he is able to begin experimenting with different types of fruit. Thanks for watching. Don't forget